Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast with Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier.
A government shutdown appears imminent as Republicans and Democrats continue to spar over a funding plan just hours before the midnight deadline. Senate Majority Leader John Thune spoke to reporters Tuesday afternoon to discuss the crisis, accusing Democrats of using the situation to pass legislation unrelated to the issue at hand.
This is a totally avoidable crisis, and again, we are not going to be held hostage by the Democrats for more than $1 trillion in new spending and all kinds of other items on their liberal wish list to include free health care for illegal immigrants in this country.
Meanwhile, President Trump announced a 20-point plan for bringing an end to the war in Gaza during a joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on Monday. Hamas leadership has acknowledged that President Trump's plan is there, but says they will have to consult with other Palestinian factions before issuing a definitive response. Lots to discuss this week. Let's bring in our panel. Fox News senior political analyst Juan Williams, chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner Byron, and Fox News senior congressional correspondent Chad Pergram. Chad, this is a fait accompli.
Yeah, the government's going to shut down just after midnight tonight simply because there is no parliamentary structure to save it. We've been through other government shutdowns before where both the House and Senate are in and they're bouncing offers back and forth and at least giving the appearance that they're trying to work. Well, all this kind of happened about a week and a half ago. The House was able to pass an interim spending bill that simply renewed all existing funding with no add-ons and said, here, Senate. And you need 60 votes to get over a filibuster in the Senate. As I always say, it's about the math. And you need, 7 Democrats if all 53 Republicans vote yes on breaking a filibuster just to get to the bill. They don't even have 53 Republicans there because Rand Paul has indicated that he's against this, as I reported on your show last night. So they need those votes. So nothing can happen to keep the government open. Here's what to watch for in the coming days. What usually happens when there's a government shutdown is one side finally cries uncle because they're getting pummeled in the polls. We don't know how that's going to play out. Number 2, we have some sort of an event that, drives the sides to sober up and break the fever. We had that in 2013 when there was the Obamacare shutdown engineered by Ted Cruz, the Republican senator from Texas, 16-day shutdown. And there was a high-speed chase and a shootout here on Capitol Hill, and Capitol police officers were injured. And lawmakers from both sides said, what are we doing here? These guys are going to work without getting paid. Let's reopen the government. And then you had in the 2018-2019 shutdown that went for 35 days, finally there were concerns about aviation safety. TSA people might not show up. You had some air traffic controllers at LaGuardia in New York not show up, concerns in Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Newark. And so they're like, okay, we have to put out this fire. So you might have some sort of an event, national or international, or a crisis that could compel them to do so. Here's the other thing to look for. Federal employees who might be off the job, they are paid through the 10th of October. They were paid just last Friday, so there's a little bit of leeway here. So you might have a shutdown for a while until people start missing their paychecks. I will say that I would highly expect the government at a minimum to be shut down through next week because starting Wednesday night at sundown, you have Yom Kippur, which goes through Thursday night at sundown. And so there's no way that they can kind of reopen the government. And House Speaker Mike Johnson is insistent that he is not going to bring the House back, period. End of story.
Yeah. So here we are, Juan. It seems the leverage seemed to be a little bit more on the Republican side because it was a clean CR, a clean continuing resolution. Democrats are saying, all kinds of things about healthcare subsidies and how important it is and making that argument. But right now, what was on the table was funding the government at the same level.
That's right. I don't know if I would describe it as giving the Republicans an advantage in the public mind. The Democrats, for their part, are making the case that the Republicans control the House, the Senate, the White House. And, as the ruling party in Washington, the dominant force, were unable on their own, as Chad was just pointing out, due to Republican defections, to pass a bill that would have kept the government running. But I think that when you stop and try to figure out the blame game and which way the finger is going to point, you have to realize that, right from the moment, it really boils down to damage. And the Democrats, for their part, seem indifferent at the moment to damage. They simply want the fight. Having last time, and this would go back to the spring, said okay to President Trump and the Republicans, we'll give you the votes to keep the government going. The Democratic base responded angrily, especially to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. So this time, the Democrats want the fight. On the Republican side, the key argument so far coming from the White House and from the halls of Congress has been, the Democrats, in terms of their demands about subsidies for Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, or Medicaid, I should say, really want to give free health care to immigrants. And the Democrats have fired back and said that's not true. Illegal immigrants aren't eligible. So that's the kind of polemical base, if you will, for the blame game going forward.
Yeah. Byron, thoughts?
Well, the blame game is Washington's favorite game. And the way I look at it is, in the past, Republicans have always said, we always get the blame when the government shuts down. And a lot of times they attributed it to media bias, but, some of the times they were to blame. Here, I think maybe a slightly different standard should be applied here, which is the side that is attaching the conditions to keeping the government going is going to get the blame over the side that says, look, let's just pass this and keep the government going. In the past, like in 2013 with the legendary Republicans defund Obamacare thing, they were the ones attaching the conditions to keeping the government open. And the Democrats said, look, let's just pass this bill, keep the spending going, and not shut down the government. Now you've essentially got the Republicans saying, here's the bill, let's just pass it. It's the same one you guys voted for in the past, and let's just keep the government going. And it's the Democrats who are saying, no, we have to have these conditions or we'll shut the government down. So that, I think, is a recipe for Democrats getting more of the blame here.
Chad, you buy that?
Well, I think that's possible. There's one little thing, though, that the Democrats have done that is interesting that might not be apparent now, and it might not work, but it might work eventually. They have hung their hat on these health care subsidies for Obamacare to defray the cost of Obamacare, and also to make sure that some of the money that was cut for health care in the big, beautiful bill, that is, returned in favor here. The issue is that in a week or two, maybe even a shorter period than that, people who their health care premiums are going to start going up. They're going to get those notices in the mail. And at that point, people might say, ooh, this is what the Democrats are talking about, because they've taken a pretty unsexy subject, a government shutdown, and talked about an issue that resonates certainly with their voters, health care. And this kind of portends what the Democrats plan to run on in the 2026 midterms. If nothing else, this is a test. So there's that. The other thing, though, and this is the problem maybe for Democrats, is that President Trump was pretty direct. And Russ Vought on Fox Business just a few minutes ago, I was on Fox Business, and Vought was on after me, declined to say how many federal workers that they would take off the job. But there are some concern that they may have given President Trump exactly the opposite of what Democrats want, the authority to go through different programs and positions and say, we don't need that, we don't need that, we don't need that, because they handed over the keys to the car to the president if the government is shut down. Now you have Democrats like Jasmine Crockett of Texas who will tell you, well, they were kind of doing that anyway during the halcyon days of Doge earlier this year when Elon Musk was on the job. But that said, President Trump, he made no bones about the fact that he would go after programs that he said will hurt Democrats that are important to Democrats. And maybe Democrats then, flip that around, but they're certainly not getting the policy victory that they wanted or achieving the things that those programs fulfill. So they might win, the battle, but they lost the war in that sense.
Panel, we'll hold it right there.
Speaking of war, you had the Secretary of War gather all the generals and admirals from around the world at Quantico and essentially give a speech that he's been giving about warrior ethos and what the military should look like and should not look like. Juan, what do you think the fallout from this is, and the coverage of it?
Well, I think there was a lot of mystery around it. I've never seen anything like it, that you would call in all of your top commanders from around the globe, and it's a huge security issue and all that, and then say, I'm going to have the secretary, what the Trump administration calls the Secretary of War, as well as the president, the commander-in-chief, address them. Well, everybody thought, what is going on? What are they going to say? In some sense, it just became a political event with Pete Hegseth, the secretary, delivering a strong performance, almost a kind of an inspirational speech. Go get him! But that he cited the name of his book, The War on Warriors, and said, no more talk about diversity, about social equity, and all the rest. We're just all about males, and this is a male effort. It was like, wow, okay, so this is like it was almost like a rally, except the absence was applause. No applause, no response. And I guess that's pro forma for military people. But in terms of what President Trump had to say, it was similarly political. And I think that there is a lot of concern about politicizing the U.S. military here. From the Trump perspective, I think it was a commanding performance in terms of he's able to call in the military and, in his address, say that they could prepare for a military, war and the like in American cities. And again, I think there's going to be a lot of response to that, not just from the president's normal critics, but I think people might get a little uncomfortable. In the last week, he sent people towards Portland and Memphis, had an incident in Chicago. So it's rising to another level in terms of armed military, American military on American streets.
Byron.
Well, on these matters, I often, like all of us at Fox, listen to what General Keane has to say, and General Keane was pretty darn favorable toward what Hegseth did, because basically Hegseth was saying, and he was echoing what was in his book, War on Warriors, that you need to go from a woke department to a war department. And he talked about standards of performance for soldiers who have to perform physical tasks in their job. He talked about rules of engagement that had been just lawyered up so much in Iraq and Afghanistan that sometimes the warfighters felt they just couldn't do their job. He talked about a lot of things like that General Keane said, look, this is what people talk about in private. And he came out and said it. And that was a good thing. Now, Hegseth has been saying this stuff in the months that he's actually been in the job. My guess is that he wanted to have this big event to sort of codify the whole thing, sort of present it in one whole, and then having the president there, just increase the amount of attention to it.
Finally, Chad, on the peace deal, that there's so many different things happening. This is a major thing. Mm-hmm. Still waiting on Hamas to respond. How is the reception to that up on Capitol Hill? And is there a sense that there is realism to this as opposed to other deals that seem to go nowhere?
When you talk to some members, they are cautiously optimistic. I think some people here, even on the Democratic side, might be willing to give President Trump a little bit of the benefit of the doubt if this works out. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating, of course. Republicans, obviously, most of those who are acolytes and loyal to the president, they'll say, yes, this is great. He's really getting things done. But as you say, it's not all worked out yet. I think that there is an appetite on Capitol Hill on both sides of the aisle to work this out, period. We are very quickly approaching the 2-year anniversary, October 7th, of course, when the war started. And so people just say, we have to put out this fire at some point. It has driven a schism through the Democratic Party. Just from a political standpoint. Not to address the war and the carnage and everything that's going on over there right now, but politically, this has been a real problem for the Democratic Party. And I think if they can figure out a way to say, okay, there's some peace, things have calmed down. Maybe then we can reassess politically where this takes us. That's one part of it. But, I will say it is a little bit hard to get a full gauge on this because the House of Representatives is not in session. Since this came out, obviously, Mike Johnson made a point that they're not going to be in session until next week. So, there's only a handful of Republicans here, a lot of House Democrats here right now, but the House is not in session.
All right, panel, thank you. Now for a bit of history. On October 1st, 1975, boxing legends Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier met for their third and final showdown, dubbed the Thrilla in Manila. The bout, serving as the decisive tiebreaker after their two previous clashes, has since been regarded as one of the greatest fights in boxing history, in part due to its distinction of being the first boxing match to be broadcast live via satellite. For 14 brutal rounds, Ali and Frazier traded blows until Frazier's corner stopped the fight, handing Ali the victory and closing the book on their legendary rivalry. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Juan, Byron, and Chad, I'm Brett Baer. We'll see you next time.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.